One of the most iconic parts of the Yakuza series is its buffet of bizarre sub-stories that have our protagonists go through sometimes sad, sometimes funny, and almost always strange misadventures while meeting a colorful array of characters. While Yakuza 0 is chronologically the first game of the series, outside of the historical spin-offs, they made like 10 other Yakuza games before they made 0, so they had some practice under their belts in making sub-stories. Yakuza 0 specifically is often lauded for the quality of its sub-stories, though certainly the quantity is nothing to sneeze at either, with a grand total of 100 sub-stories between its two protagonists, which to this day makes it one of the Yakuza games with the most side quests. As a lot of people say that Yakuza 0 may have the best sub-story offering of all the Yakuzas, and the Like a Dragons, and the Judgments, and maybe even one of the best side quest offerings of any game ever made, if you want to take it that far, I wanted to go through every single sub-story in Yakuza 0 and rank them from worst to best, while also assigning them to tiers from F to S. I'll be using this tier list someone created on Tier Maker for illustrative purposes. Big shout out to Kiryu Fartporn for that one. Well then, there's 100 sub-stories to go through. Let us begin. We are starting in F tier, which contains all the Yakuza 0 sub-stories that I would say I either straight up dislike or I just don't really see as being worthy of even being called a sub-story because there's just not much to them. I would say there's not that many sub-stories that I hate in Yakuza 0. Deciding on the last place, the worst sub-story in the game, was actually a bit tricky for me. Mostly because almost all the sub-stories that were contenders for last place were so similar that they may as well have shared the spot. What I am talking about are the telephone club related sub-stories. In the telephone club minigame you go to, well, a telephone club, and you have to answer calls from women who may potentially date you by playing a strange shooting game where you have to shoot at potential answers to given queries that ideally don't leave you looking like a bit of a creep. Each session will probably take about 5 or so minutes, and will score your date with one of 9 possible women. These 9 possible women are divided by, and please stay with me here, 3 different underwear colors. And among those respective underwear colors they are divided by good, neutral and bad ending. The good endings are the ones that Kiryu is actually interested in. The neutral endings happen when Kiryu is tricked and ghosted by some woman that doesn't really exist. And the bad endings include 3 women that Kiryu would prefer not to tangle with. All the good and bad endings correspond to a sub-story each. Additionally, all neutral endings are also a sub-story, as in once you get one of them, the sub-story is completed. Now, the thing about these outcomes that can really fuck you up when you're going for completion is that they are repeatable. As in, once you get one of these outcomes, you may get it again, and again, and again. So to be able to complete all sub-stories and face the final super boss, you have to get all 7 possible outcomes of this minigame. And yeah, I do have to say, grinding them all out with the only hints being the underwear color and the voice apparently being slightly different for each girl is pretty ass. This minigame is also pretty horrible to be walked in on. So, that gets us to number 100, the worst sub-story in the game. While it really could have been any of them, I have decided to settle on the innocent hookup. As established, the gameplay to get all of these telephone club sub-stories grants a big point deduction to all of them, but that could be offset if you were rewarded with an interesting and fun sub-story, which very much isn't the case. The problem isn't that the sub-story is somehow offensively bad either, it's just completely and utterly unremarkable. Kiryu goes to meet this girl, a little cutscene plays, and that's it. Nothing funny happens, there's no twist to it or anything, it's just nothing. There are some other sub-stories in the series that I think are bad, but which at least make me feel something, even if those feelings are negative. But sub-stories like this, which you will forget about 10 minutes after playing them, tend to be the ones I dislike the most. Well, those and also those that have actively bad gameplay segments attached to them. So I mean, there you go. In my opinion, the worst sub-story that Yakuza 0 has to offer. The next one is pretty much the same. Like, the sub-story is literally the same except you do like one more thing. You have to look further to see that when meeting the girl, there happen to be 3 girls with almost the same fits standing there, which I guess was slightly amusing. Like, what are the chances, eh? As you can see, I am really grasping at straws to rank these ones. And, once again, the next sub-story is pretty much the exact same, except this time there's a fight to break up the monotony of the telephone club grind we have been going through for the last hour to get all 7 of these sub-stories. At least there's a pinch of drama in this one, still mostly a big nothing burger though. Okay, we have arrived at the bad ending sub-stories, which I think are slightly better than the good ending ones. I don't know, kinda depends on your perspective honestly, like I would also understand why you would find these worse. At least there's a bit of a punchline here in comparison to the good ending sub-stories. And also a punchline that is dropped in this franchise a bit too fucking often. Like, I don't know if I would call it funny, really, but at least it elicits some kind of reaction in my brain cells, so I think that might be a positive point. maybe? The first one of these is Verbal Warning, where, I don't know man, in this one he meets Squilvia, I think. Fun fact, Squilvia actually deals more damage than a gun in this game. Just thought you might want to know. Next is the Predator's Call, where Kiryu meets a cougar, in some ways I suppose, just not in the ways one would seek out, mostly in the wild animal sort of ways. I do think it's kind of funny how Kiryu just goes into his fighting stance here, like shit got him so fucked up he's actually about ready to fight a woman, which as often established he doesn't really do. And then the final Bad Ant Telephone Club story has a meet up with a lady slightly older than he expected. I think this is the best sub-story of the bunch just because it's funny how oblivious Kiryu is in this one, somehow reasoning that this lady is probably the girl's mother who for some reason came to their meeting spot in her stead. Guess the telephone club grind really demented his brain. I mean, can't blame him there, I feel the same way. Also, Kiryu anti-MILF stance law drop? Or maybe it's a MILF? MILF? But yeah, these three are sub-stories that are mildly amusing, maybe, but they are very very far from the funniest sub-stories in the game. So I think it's fair to rank them among the worst sub-stories of this game. At last we are moving away from the telephone club. This next sub-story is interesting because, as far as I know, it's the only sub-story in the whole game that you have to complete during the story. And it's interesting for no other reason, because it's another complete nothing burger of a sub-story. The only thing that happens is that you are introduced to the catfight arena, which by the way houses the only minigame worse than the telephone club minigame. So we'll deduct some points for that, which lands us squarely in the negative. The only reason why it's ranked above the telephone club ones is that you don't have to go through a boring grind to get to it. It's quick and painless, but the substory itself is so devoid of anything that it's another strong contender for the worst substory in the game, and it's probably only a substory in the first place to pad out the number to get to 100. I do not respect this substory, that is all I have to say. This next one is the first of 6 training substories on this list. Yakuza 0 has a bunch of substories, mostly the training, Mr. Shakedown and friendship substories that only technically cover the beginning of a character's story. For most trainers, for instance, the substory covers the introduction plus first lesson for the trainer, but then ends. I have decided to take not just the substory itself, but also the stuff that comes after into account to rank these. Training in Yakuza 0 has you go through a set of little missions for a given trainer, with a little bit of surrounding story, and rewards you with new moves for each of the 6 main battle styles. I have to admit I am not the biggest fan of training missions in most of the Yakuza games. They are usually fine, I guess, but to me personally they just feel like a bit of an extra grind that I go through because I want to be able to access all available moves, and not because it's a particularly enriching experience. Throughout the series though, there are definitely better and worse trainers. I will say I would rather have them than not have them, because I think it adds a bit of flavor to learning moves, instead of exclusively unlocking them through an unlock screen. But if you compare them as pieces of side content with most sub-stories, they just aren't all that fun or interesting most of the time. Now as for Kamoshi's training specifically, I dislike it actively. To unlock all his moves and finish his training, you have to do 5 of these missions where you are not allowed to be hit even once, for a minute apiece. The problem here, I find, is that it's simply not fun.
If it's not fun, why bother?
It honestly doesn't feel like much of a test of your skills, rather a test of your mental. And my mental is not okay, brother. The main reason why you may get hit is usually because you're falling asleep at the wheel, because this shit is tedious. And if you fail, you get to repeat all the same dialogue and all that. Also, the camera here is the worst that it gets in Yakuza 0 by far. I have no idea what they were doing here, but half the time you just kinda have to guess when to dodge, because your opponent is hiding behind one of the onlookers. Next up, we've got another sub-story that is part of a set of very similar sub-stories. While exploring Kamurocho and Sotenbori, you meet these big-ass brutes, all of them known as Mr. Shakedown. They're looking for fights, and if you lose to them, you lose all your money. While winning nets your big chungus chunk of change. There's 2 of them per character, so 4 in total, and all of them get their own sub-story. These consist of them introducing themselves and their motivations, and then you having to win one fight against them. Though their stories still go on with subsequent fights. I kinda like Mr. Shakedown mechanically, but I don't really think any of these sub-stories particularly stand out. And while I think the respective backstories and motivations of them are pretty funny, I don't think the way they are told is all that engaging, especially because most of my interactions with Mr. Shakedown happen while I'm grinding for money, so I won't really be in the mood to listen to their diatribe. I'm ranking all of them here one after the other, basically just by which one has the funniest motivation behind his shakedowns. Very similarly to the different telephone club sub-stories, the rankings on these ones are basically interchangeable. The lowest ranked is A Dream Unfulfilled, where you encounter Mr. Shakedown Yuki Sato, whose reason for attacking us over and over is that he wants to fight. And that's it. Exciting. The second Mr. Shakedown on the list is Kawahashi, whom Majima encounters and who simply needs money because he needs money. Egashira, our next Mr. Shakedown, is trying to acquire money as he wants to become the ultimate being, and then goes to space, I think, and eventually stops thinking, I believe. The apex predator is, of course, not to be confused with another famous Yakuza character, a sex predator. Allegedly. Our final Mr. Shakedown is Oe, who steals Majima's hard-earned money because he hates him for having hair, and needs the money to restore his own. I guess Turkish hairlines wasn't a thing yet back in 88. It is probably the most valid crash out of these four at least. Majima does have pretty swag hair, let's be real. He probably could have avoided a lot of hardship if he were rocking the classic yee ass haircut a bit earlier, cause ain't too many getting envious of that head of hair. The next substory is the first in D tier, which was the hardest tier for me to nail down. F tier are the ones I actively dislike or I feel are not really worth taking up a substory slot, so to speak. D tier mostly contains substories that just don't offer that much, are kind of boring but are fairly inoffensive, and maybe sometimes there's some gems in there, but just mostly not that interesting. I was thinking of maybe also pulling the Shakedown substories up here, they are inoffensive after all, but I do feel that those in particular just do not do well at taking advantage of the substory system, and don't really feel justified in being called substories. A lot of the training and friendship substories end up in D tier for me, mostly because I just don't think there's a lot of meat on them, but because they justify their existence a little bit more, I don't want to put them in one tier with the telephone club stuff or the concentrated nothingness that is beyond the door. Except for Kamoji's training, but that shit's personal. The rank of the worst training mission was a bit of a toss-up for me at first. Kamoji's training is definitely less stimulating and more frustrating if you fail, but Tatsu's training is more of a grind because you have to do these destruction challenges and also do collection jobs for her. The destruction challenges are pretty fun, but they do get old very quickly. Still, even with it being a bit of a grind, I feel like the challenges and collections actually having you fight, instead of dodge while haunted by the camera from Area 64, comfortably raises it a tier above Kamoji. Next is Fei Hu's training. I gotta be real, this training just didn't leave much of an impression on me at all. You do little weapon fights and that's kinda it. It's quick and painless, I suppose, and I enjoyed the fights against him, but that's about it. The thing I appreciate the most about Arashi's training is that the training parts are really short, and you actually don't have to do all the dance battles like with the destruction stuff in Tatsu's training, for example. You don't even need to finish the fights in which you learn the new moves like usually the case in training fights. You literally only have to use the moves a few times and that's it. But the training being short is also pretty damning a thing to be a positive, really. Just another okay training substory in my eyes. The next substory in D tier is the Sushi Gin substory, which is the first occurrence so far of the aforementioned friendship substories. Friendship substories in this game are similar to the Shakedown and training substories, in that the majority of the content isn't actually contained in the substory itself. It's more extreme with most of these friendship substories actually, because for almost all of them a substory itself starts and ends within one conversation, literally consisting only of a few lines of dialogue. I wasn't 100% certain how to rank these with that in mind. If I were to rate them only by what happens between the substory start and substory end screens, pretty much literally all of them would land in F tier, but I thought that would be a bit boring, so I am ranking them by taking the friendship events themselves into consideration as well. Even with that in mind though, a lot of them fall into D tier. I think the friendship system itself is a decent idea to make the world feel a bit more lived in, by having a lot of different shops have people in them that you get acquainted with, but so many of them feel so bare bones that most of them end up just being very forgettable. Sushi Gin is a good example for what a lot of them are. You just go to the same establishment again and again, and every now and then there's some crumbs of story, and you also have to go all the way to the docks to catch some fish, which is slightly annoying, but whatever man, here, have your fish. Then there's the Komian friendship substory, which is almost the same as Sushi Gin, but at least the river is close so you don't have to take a detour to go fishing. I think this next friendship substory might be the most straightforward out of them all. You just go buy stuff at the combini like 5 times, then you help the combini clerk with a little thing and then suddenly you own the store. The only reason that this is higher than the two before is because I'm not forced to go fishing, which might make me sound like I hate gameplay, but actually I just hate fish. The friendship with the steel bartender is also very similar to the aforementioned substory, except to grind it out you need to get your medication ready so you can drink more alcohol. The little trivia quiz at the end is kinda cute, and seeing bartender Majima is pretty cool, so I enjoyed this one a bit more than the other shop-related friendship quests. Both Kiryu and Majima encounter individuals who are known as Mr. Libido, for their shared passion for all things horny. If you ask any Yakuza fan about Mr. Libido, they will almost certainly think of this guy, for he is horny incarnate. But there's also this guy. I don't think this Mr. Libido sucks or anything, nor is his friendship quest terrible. terrible. But in a game where this fella exists, this guy just doesn't leave much of an impression. To rank his friendship up, you have to find a certain amount of telephone cards, which is a slightly annoying task, but it's not that horrible. Yet no part of the sub-story is really that remarkable. If your only character trait is to be horny, you should really make sure there's no one hornier than you out there. Another variety of cryptid that both protagonists encounter is Mr. Moneybags. These creatures teach you how to throw away your money and also teach you how to invest, i.e. give your money to the other protagonist. They are basically just there as little dress up for these game mechanics. Apart from that, you just have short conversations with them and that's about it. And there's a slightly annoying aspect where you are gated by what chapter you are in, so you can only pay the highest amount that Mr. Moneybags wants by like the last chapter, I think. Thing is, this shit ain't even a scratch to my pocketbook cause I grinded on Mr. Shakedown. I'm richer than you are, Mr. Moneyman. But yeah, the one I have ranked lower is Kiryu's version. Majima's variant is ranked higher still, because I think the concept of a guy who is trying to get rid of his money but can't do it faster than he gets money is pretty good. And he's got the better lines as well, like got a money problem, too much money, holy shit, that's a hard as fuck line. We've got another friendship quest, the Stop and Search Specialist, who constantly stops us to search us for any illegal possessions we might carry with us, which I don't think the guy's got any probable cause for. After a while of doing that, he starts trauma dumping on us, and the only reason why he ends up helping out a civilian in need, intervening while a crime is about to be committed, is because a criminal tells him that that would be the right thing to do. Really makes you think, doesn't it? Yakuza 0 has 6 different sub-stories that are all very similar. Both protagonists at some point accidentally discover Dolce Kamiya's radio show, where the host reads listeners' postcards on air and rewards those who get on air 3 times with a 1 million yen prize. Which of course isn't really anything to these guys who build literal gold statues of their own selves because they are so rich, but I suppose human greed knows no bounds. They both decide to write stories of their everyday misadventures in the hope of receiving the grand prize. I think these sub-stories are pretty neat. I think the little gameplay feature of deciding which sub-story encounters would make for a good radio story is nice. And hearing the retellings of their exploits from our 2 heroes' perspectives is quite cool as well. The one I have ranked the lowest is the second Kiryu postcard sub-story. This one is literally just a retread of Kiryu's first postcard sub-story in terms of content. And yeah, then we have Kiryu's first postcard sub-story, as it also contains the introduction to the radio show and Kiryu's reaction to it. Yeah, I mean, to rank some of these sub-stories you really gotta be splitting hairs. I think the funniest aspect of Kiryu's postcard sub-stories is him hiding what he's doing from his assistant, but apart from that it's quite straightforward. And then next is Majima's second postcard sub-story, which like with Kiryu's is a retread of the first Majima postcard one. And then we have Kiryu's third postcard sub-story, and this is the one where the prize is revealed. Some random item, but more importantly he gets to meet Dolce Kamiya and shake his hand. And isn't that what it's all about? And the next sub-story in the list is actually not another postcard one. Those will come later. Instead we have the first of another set of sub-stories. In Majima's major side mode, the Cabaret Club, he steals away the top hostesses of all its rival clubs on the road to becoming the cabaret champion. Majima gets to know all these top hostesses better and help them become better hostesses in the hostess conversation minigame, which at this point has been a mainstay in the Yakuza series, and still proves to be one of the most difficult minigames of them all, as you need to make the correct choices while talking to women. For each of these 6 so-called platinum hostesses, the given hostess training culminates in a sub-story, each picking up on some elements, life circumstances and personality traits established in the prior conversations. You can only ever do one hostess training at a time, and have to play the cabaret minigame again to be able to do another. Each hostess has 7 training units, so if you want to do all 6 hostess sub-stories you will have to do a grand total of 42 training units, meaning you will have to run the club 42 times. In my experience you can finish the cabaret story in far fewer than 42 runs, particularly if you pay for all the partner stores and thus increase your club's fans early on. And if you also already have enough money, you may find yourself in a position where you have to run the club again and again, just so you can do the hostess training. While I don't find it as horrible as something like the telephone club, it's still a pretty annoying grind. Some of the sub-stories make up for it by being pretty good, while others are just decidedly mid, really. The lowest ranked of these is I's sub-story, which is basically just like a 2-minute long dialogue scene. This one and 3 of the other hostess sub-stories just don't have that much to them. I think if you also include the training conversations and all that, they are all characterized decently enough, and I think it's a great vehicle to see another side to Majima as well, but none of these really make for incredibly memorable sub-stories. So yeah, I is the lowest. Second lowest is Chika. It's basically the same thing to me really. As for why it's ranked 1 spot higher, I don't know, vibes I guess. Next is Saki, who has a bit of a confrontation with some goons and learns to rely on others and all that. And then there's Mana. This one felt slightly more fleshed out to me than the others. But I will be real with you. The deciding factor why this is higher ranked than the other 3 is that while Mana was being harassed by gooners, fucking Mr. Libido was just chilling in the background of the cutscene, just being like, oh yeah, I'm not seeing anything, must have been the wind. Which I'm pretty sure isn't really intended to be that way, but that shit made me laugh, man. What the hell is your problem, dude? Get your freak on somewhere else. Next is Majima's friendship with the clerk of Gandhara, which is a store where you can go to watch porn and jerk off. I guess I appreciate the inherent absurdity of having a side quest where you make friends with a porn store clerk, but I just don't think you're gonna make a goated side quest that is about grind watching a bunch of pornography. I mean hell, this is only like the 3rd best sub-story about watching porn on this list. I do think the ending of this goes kinda hard though. Majima tries to find an infamous videotape that is said to be crazier than all others, and he does receive it from a mysterious woman clad in white. While the truth eludes Majima and his newfound friend, we get a glimpse of something beyond the natural. Honestly, I kinda fuck with it when Yakuza drops a sub-story or two that hint at supernatural shenanigans going on. Maybe the sub-story actually is a little bit cinema. I feel like Majima's postcard sub-stories are a decent bit better than Kiryu's equivalent, honestly. And that mostly comes down to Majima and Yuki's bickering sibling dynamic. Also, the first of these, in this case, is rated higher than the second once again, because the second kinda just is a repeat of the first for the most part. And me saying that it was actually a repeat of earlier, because I think I already said that, so yeah, it's repeats all the way down, I suppose. And finally, Majima's 3rd postcard sub-story, and the final of all the postcard sub-stories. Much like in Kiryu's case, radio host Dolce Kamiya himself graces Majima with a visit to hand over a prize worth an amount that might truly be a lifesaver for a common man like you or me, but is not even a blip on the radar of ultra-capitalist Majima Goro. And yet even a rich man's heart may remain empty. There are things that money cannot buy, such as a handshake with Kamiya, the opportunity of which is coldly stolen away by the dastardly Yuki, leaving Majima as the sad dog of Shimano. Frankly, I have a hard time thinking of anything worse that has happened in Majima's life. Stings, doesn't it, you rich fuck? The next sub-story is Sakura Shock, which is the final of the 7 outcomes of the Telephone Club. Okay, so I think this might be the dumbest placement in the entire ranking, especially seeing as I started this list by ranting about how shit the Telephone Club sub-stories are, but hear me out. I mean, I probably won't convince you, but hear me out anyway. What happens in the sub-story then? As usual, Kiryu gets a date with a girl over the phone and heads to the meeting place. But rather than meeting a girl he fancies or doesn't fancy, he meets no one. He's been had, he's been bamboozled, he's been ghosted. The thing is, I could actually see how one would hate this one more than all the other sub-stories, because if we take another look at this beautiful table that I created, there's actually always a 1/3 chance to get this sub-story, so statistically this will be the one you'll see the most often out of the 7 Telephone Club sub-stories. Having a knee-jerk response of hatred for this one is certainly not inappropriate, I will grant that much. So why is this piece of shit so high ranked then? Well, because I laughed. I laughed during the sub-story. What do you want me to say? It made me laugh. Does it need to do much more? I just like the ending bit here, Kiryu being sad and waxing poetic. He's about to drop the most fire haiku of the decade, man. Also feels like the most Kiryu outcome out of the possible Telephone Club outcomes. Now, does it deserve to be this much higher than the other ones? Probably not. The Obitarian side quest is a harrowing tale of what happens when man decides to fight back against the forces of nature. Many works of fiction revolve around the assumption that you can do anything you put your mind to, but some stories opt for more realistic readings of the world. One of those is this sub-story. Majima fights back against an old bag trying to cut in line while he's queuing up to get some takoyaki, which turns out to be a grave mistake. This old bag is the legendary Obitarian, a woman who has lived since the times of the Tokugawa shogunate, major troublemaker and pain in the ass to everyone around her. Majima tries to retrieve his place in line, and he vocally reprimands her for her actions, which the Obitarian uses against him by causing a scene. He gives up his quest for takoyaki to return another day, yet that other day ends up following the exact same pattern of beefing with the old lady. It almost seems like Majima shall be tormented by the Obitarian forevermore, until a courageous youth decides to attack the foul beast. Sadly, we have to side with her, and as a reward she assaults Majima. The Obitarian is truly a despicable villain. The Yakuza-looking man did nothing wrong. Majima did nothing wrong. My man just wanted some fresh as hell takoyaki, but I guess some things just aren't meant to be. This low of a ranking might seem harsh, and definitely has the potential to be pretty controversial among Yakuza 0 sub-story connoisseurs. But I gotta be real, I'm just a certified Obitarian hater, alright? I can't stand seeing her, especially after she's been barreled out time and time time again over the course of the franchise, and I can't make myself rank her substory any higher, even if there's some funny moments there. I do enjoy how it throws Majima off his cool though. Shit almost made him unleash his mad dog prematurely. The backphone side quest is fine, I guess. It's fairly underwhelming though, and not much more than a glorified fetch quest. This guy is out here yapping about how the backphone is the future, but then it takes like a full battery charge to make one call. Honestly, the thug's kicking his shit in. I mean, that's the wrong thing to do, but I kinda get it, man. This backphone is so shitty that we gotta fetch like 3 things so we unlock the groundbreaking feature of saving our game. I do like sub-stories like this that really take advantage of fun little pieces of the era the game takes place in. The good old times of backphones. Society was still proper then. Majima and Kiryu have these almost exact same friendship storylines going on, with the Sega arcade worker. Because they're so similar I can't really not rank them one right after the other. The lower ranked one is Majima's version. They both basically try to beat the established records of the respective arcade worker as they promise the ride of their life in return. I don't know, I just think they're kinda funny cause the guys get so fucking horned up out of nowhere. Kiryu's is ranked higher cause I think it's a bit funnier for such an ever-stoic man to be so horny on main. Though it's not like it's that rare of a sight. Bacchus is my favorite Kiryu trainer in this game by far. I think about 98% of that is his voice lines. But frankly, I also just like his vibes. He's some weird foreigner who loves telling people about how they should inject their money into their own veins. For some reason always just creeping in an alleyway right next to the pawn mag vending machine. And seems to be the most wanted man in the world, hunted by international hitmen. Our main story Yakuza troubles are basically nothing in comparison. I also just think it's funny how every time he teaches us a new move, another hitman schlub stumbles his way into our back alley at the most perfectly conveniently timed moment to get beaten up by us. Truly one of the trainer sub-stories maybe ever. Of all the training missions in Yakuza 0, Komaki's training is the one I enjoyed the most. Or I guess Komaki's training actually. Truly the greatest pseudonym since Ben Kenobi. Much like with all the other trainers, Majima goes through 5 bouts to learn new moves. The part I really enjoy about this training is the concept of how Majima learns new moves here. Rather than Komaki actually teaching him Komaki style moves, Majima instead learns new moves while fighting Komaki. Moves which counter his Komaki style. Meaning that while Komaki is Majima's teacher, Majima isn't exactly an apprentice in the most traditional sense. I just think it's a cool way of tying in the future Kiryu-Majima rivalry here. And I also like how this apprentice situationship is called back to in Kiwami. Both protagonists of the game get a set of 3 each of sub-stories related to the disco minigame. The disco minigame is one of many rhythm games that have appeared over the course of the Yakuza games and their spin-offs. Karaoke is by far the most iconic to be sure, but due to its presence in the most popular Yakuza game there is, I'd wager most Yakuza players are familiar with this one as well. It's a very different take on rhythm games. Instead of simply pressing one of 4 buttons at the right time, you also have to maneuver across the dance floor to then press the correct button at the correct time. By repeatedly getting the timing of the button presses right, you build a combo, and your score also increases depending on how many steps you take across the dance floor before hitting the next button input. You do have to move across unique fields though, as each tile only counts once. Finally, you have a fever gauge, which builds up and gives you mad points if you hit the directional arrows with the correct timing. The disco minigame is a fair bit trickier to figure out when you first play it when compared to karaoke, and the skill ceiling is a lot higher. But once you figure it out, this actually becomes one of the most satisfying minigames I've played in the series. It's probably among the more controversial ones among the player base because the controls and the timing are a bit finicky to figure out. And more difficult minigames that are needed for completion are basically always at least slightly controversial with some players. But yeah, now one of the best minigames in the series, don't at me. In these disco sub-stories you face off against a bunch of dancers and dance battles. In general, each of these sub-stories doesn't have a gargantuan amount of story, but I still think they are neat. I would say they profit in the ranking from being attached to the disco minigame cause that shit is genuinely tight as fuck. I would say that Majima's dance story is weaker across the board, but gets a bit stronger with subsequent sub-stories. The first one is just some guy. Then we have the second one, where the opponent is a bit of a weirdo but becomes a different sort of weirdo as soon as he gets on the dance floor. This guy's got a bit more character than this fellow, so he's ranked higher. And then we battle the Koi no Disco Queen or whatever. And I think it's cool that the final dance battles are actually a bit more difficult, rather than just anyone being able to steamroll them easily. I do find it funny as well how Majima just screams in her face after winning. Man, this guy really gets into shit, doesn't he? But yeah, disco is pretty fun, man. In Errands on the Run, Majima meets Eren-kun, a generational simp coming to bodily harm by virtue of running errands for a girl he has the hots for, his only reward for that being a demeaning nickname. The majority of the sub-story is a glorified fetch quest, as we help Eren-kun run his errands by running errands. In doing so, we get to meet the lady of his heart, who, adding insult to the insult that was already added to injury, has a boyfriend. Majima ends up being forced to fight this boyfriend, and also lectures Eren-kun about how he needs to stop being such a simp for women that that hate him. And then he's like, you're right, and becomes a simp for Majima instead. I heard you like dance, because we got some more dance sub-stories. We had first dance sub-story chain, yes, but what about second dance sub-story chain? Don't tell me you don't know about second dance sub-story chain. This one is Kiryo's dance storyline, which I personally found a bit better than Majima's across the board, though it's always possible that I am biased by having played this one first. But then what is bias but opinions persevering or whatever the fuck? We start out simple. In Don't Dance Alone, Kiryu faces some dweeb who doesn't look like he belongs on the dance floor. This sub-story contains not much, but two fucking nerd-ass goofs allegedly slaying the dance floor. After winning, Dance Man becomes Kiryu's new sworn brother, and that's about it. Now this one is a bit better I find, mostly because of how goofy Kiryu acts. And of the part where he's like, man, I thought she was flirting with me, but she just wanted to dance battle. He seems so disappointed. What a damn goof. But yeah, there isn't too much else to these two sub-stories. This might be a good moment to remind you that these sub-stories have gone up quite a bit in ranking just because I enjoy the minigame a lot. As for why Kiryu's is higher than Majima's, I think it mainly comes down to the fact that Kiryu, with his innate slight awkwardness and stoicness, is a bit funnier to observe when mingling with his fellow dancers than Majima, who's a slight bit strange at the best of times anyway. As Kiryu has become the president of a real estate company, he has various duties that he must fulfill. One of those duties is to conduct job interviews with potential new employees, and 3 such interviews are included here as sub-stories. This sub-story is the first of the 3 interviews conducted. Kiryu meets with potential man, who actually turns out to be a scammer. Apparently this is, or was, a thing in Japan, that people would go to job interviews so that they'd be paid a little sum of money for the taxi fare and then ghost the employer? I don't really know about all that. Do I seem like the kind of guy who'd have a job? It's pretty neat to see Kiryu actually work like a somewhat normal company president though. I also like the part where he just asks completely out of pocket shit because after all, why not? Not like anyone can fire him, he is this company. Next, the second interview. I just thought this one was really funny because she's immediately like, oh yeah, you wanna know the color of my underwear, right? Like, damn, I thought Kiryu was out of pocket in the last sub-story, but maybe job interviewers just ask that shit. I mean, what do I know? Do I seem like the type of guy to go to job interviews? This one is the third of 3 job interview sub-stories, and the only one that ends in success for Kiryu. While the candidate stumbles through the interview and screws up at basically every possible corner, Kiryu looks beyond the surface and recognizes a quality much more important than what a seemingly good candidate may display on the outside: authenticity. Obviously, this is the most unrealistic sub-story out of all of these so far, but despite his terrible interview performance, he gets the job for his quality of character. At the end, after going outside, we also get to see the other interviewees that were trying to scam us earlier vent their frustrations by kicking the shit out of a dog. Our new employee won't let that shit fly and steps in. Then we just watch him get his shit kicked in and Kiryu is like, you truly are a reliable guy, and leaves. Next up is B tier. The sub-stories in this tier are just generally good sub-stories. They don't quite have what it takes to be up there with the all-time classics, but they are just across the board solid. Next comes one of 2 still remaining hostess sub-stories. This one is the one attached to Hibiki's training, called A Little Brotherly Love. Now the thing that elevates this one pretty far above all the other hostess sub-stories we've had so far is that this one is more of an actual little story than all the others, which were kind of just nothing. All the lower ranked hostess quests are basically just this image, and this one is that too, but it also introduces us to Hibiki's brother and shows us Hibiki's struggles of having to basically raise him herself. Plus I like this one bit where Yuki, upon seeing Majima with a child, just immediately assumes that he kidnapped him. What the fuck? It just feels like there's a little bit more to this quest and Hibiki's story than to the other hostesses so far. I mean, I don't know why she's meowing or whatever, but you know, still a decent little sub-story. We've got another friendship sub-story. This time we make friends with the bowling alley clerk. This one is pretty okay for the most part. You just have to bowl a bunch really. And I enjoy Yakuza 0's bowling, so I don't really have any complaints. As far as I know, it's completely fine to just do solo bowling to advance the friendship. Though I also challenged her to a game, which was a slight bit more annoying because I had to watch the entirety of her turn. Isn't that horrible? Why do I have to watch my friends bowl if I want to go bowling? My antisocial ass would rather enjoy a good bowl in isolation. Also, this lady has like a bowling fetish or something. I don't really know what's up with that one. Frankly, it makes me feel a bit uncomfortable and I will take it up with her manager. She's saying shit like, I have a bowling fetish, so this is the perfect job for me. Lady, that's the opposite of the perfect job for you. You shouldn't be horned up 24/7 at your job. That's not right. I don't want the cashier to pop a boner while scanning my cornflakes. This is not how society should operate. And even if you decide to make a mockery of the social contract in such a way, can you at least keep quiet about it? I'm trying to bowl here. In any case, the friendship story culminates in the clerk telling you about a special offer where you get a fresh turkey if you bowl a turkey, meaning 3 strikes in a row. Of course, hitting such a goal is light work for beasts like us. You just gotta hit the old tried and true Yakuza bowling technique where you take the 12-pound ball, go to this notch, throw that shit full force no spin into the center and win. After displaying your true baller chops, you shall be rewarded with a scene that single-handedly catapults a substory upwards in ranking by a tier or 2. The clerk hands over your reward, the promised juicy turkey, which isn't quite as cooked or as turkey as expected. Indeed, it's actually a raw chicken, so raw that it still makes clucking noises. Thus, we are introduced to iconic Yakuza 0 character Nugget, whom Kiryu adopts and assigns as one of the managers of his real estate company. I think for many Yakuza 0 players this scene has proven to be the point where they realize that this is actually a good game. So for that alone, this one's a classic. The mystery caller substory is kinda sick. Less so because of the gameplay, because you just fetch a bunch of stuff from the weapon shop and bring it to this phone booth, and more so because the concept is cool. Majima hears a random phone booth ringing, which is strange as it's a random phone booth. Upon inspecting it and picking up the phone, he is on the line with a mystery caller, who tells him to please get him a gun and put it in the booth. Any sane man would of course immediately leave and never look back, but no one's ever accused Majima of being sane before. Majima delivers a whole grocery list worth of weapons in exchange for monetary compensation, and after all that is asked to help the mystery man as he's gotten himself into a little problem that leaves the whole of Sotenbori in danger, allegedly. When the mad dog in shining armor arrives, he soon realizes that he has been bamboozled, and fights off a bunch of suspicious men by breakdancing. God, I love breaker style. Majima has been tricked to do the man's dirty work once more, but he has an apology gift for us, a human being. Jesus Christ. Yeah, you get a hostess for your club as a reward. She doesn't even have a name or anything. Yeah, I think this is all fine and dandy. Let's not ask any more questions or anything. This substory is the kind of shit that'll happen to you if you answer the phone when an unknown number is calling. So get it twisted. Never talk to anyone on the phone, except if you want to receive a live human being woman in exchange for providing your services. In that case, go ahead. Is human trafficking the solution to the male loneliness epidemic? Well then, I have mentioned a Mr. Libido before, but I hadn't yet mentioned the Mr. Libido. The definite article, you might say. If anyone thinks of Mr. Libido, they'll be thinking of this schooner. Majima first meets this creature during the course of the main story, but then meets him again after choking his chicken at the masturbation store. Thus begins a magnificent friendship, one in which Mr. Libido and Majima share in lustful successes and failures. As the adage goes, homies who come together, stay together. Interestingly, the Gandera clerk and Mr. Libido have almost the same conditions to advance the friendship, so if you keep watching unique videos at the video store, you're just constantly hanging with these weird-ass perverts back to back. Mr. Libido's ranking here is pretty much owed to him just being a very memorable character, with a lot of good lines. It's not the deepest substory ever, but to a guy like me, that's plenty. A very interesting substory is the million-yen drug test one, where Majima literally follows some shady back alley advertisement to meet up with some shadier still dweebs who claim to currently work on a variety of miracle drugs, which promise radical improvements on public health if they prove effective. To be certain of its efficacy though, they need test subjects, and rather than going through the bureaucratic nightmare that is getting official approval for clinical human trials, they opted for shady back alley dealings to find guinea pigs to test a questionable medicine on. Majima, his eyes having turned into dollar signs upon hearing of the promised cash reward, participates in the test and downs that shit like it's prime. Now what the drug fellas didn't mention is that upon consuming the drugs, he also needs to go through a fight with a bunch of goons off the street, because reasons. Additionally, the administered drugs, of which he has to take a grand total of 3 by the way, do not at all work as advertised, instead worsening all ills they seek to cure. In this ailed condition, Majima must undertake the fights. He has to take a total of 3 pills, all having different adverse effects on his well-being. For the battles he has to fight each time, this has the following effects respectively. He slowly loses life, he keeps automatically switching between his battle styles, and he is blinded. These slight gameplay changes in combat are actually really cool in theory. In practice though, they're just kinda whatever, mostly play out like normal fights. And the most interesting is probably the forced style switch. That fight actually feels a bit more unique. In general, I'd really like it if more substories did some funky stuff with a gameplay like this, and I hope the devs take some inspiration from stuff like this for future games. Obviously there's a lot of this kind of stuff in the Colosseum and Climax battles, but having more unique fights and substories would really benefit some of them. After going through all of the trials, Majima's was rewarded with the much-deserved payment. Indeed, this whole operation surprisingly wasn't a scam. I mean, I guess it kinda sorta was, considering no part of the ad mentioned you'd have to fight for your life while drugged with the shit that made Snoop Dogg, but that kind of stuff is probably par for the course when you're following back-alley posters advertising drug tests. Like obvious health and safety violations, lies and general shady practices aside, he does get paid in the end, and walks away with his life and a cool 10 mil in hand. I see that as an absolute win. In the Stadium Jumper sub-story, we meet this dumbass, whose ultimate dream, for some reason, is to cross this specific bridge while wearing this specific stadium jumper. Of course, in the ever so dangerous streets of the Yakuza universe, such a seemingly simple task soon becomes Herculean, as every goon in the general vicinity immediately becomes furious at the sight of him because reasons. Now, if he were carrying a charismatic photo of some guy, you know, I'd understand the reaction, but just because he's wearing some jumper? When we first meet the lad, we give him some medicine to drink, which leads to this absolute cinema transition of the beer drinking guy sign. Plus 10 points to the sub-story for that. As for the gameplay part, I was kinda afraid of this one on my most recent replay for some reason. I don't know if it's just owed to my failing memory wrongly recalling how it played on prior playthroughs. I thought it would be pretty annoying, but Breaker style really just clears here supremely. After successfully guiding our friend across the street, his dream is fulfilled. And the moral of the story is, chase your dreams even if they're stupid. Except if they're stupid. Next up we have another Majima sub-story, From the Heart, in which we meet Guy, also known as Guy in Love, who is facing a bit of a problem. He promises girl that he would give her a very specific heart necklace as a birthday present, but the very necklace happens to be sold out. With no way to get his hands on such a necklace, he turns to the first shady guy he sees in the street for help. His grand idea is to create a fake necklace he can give to his girlfriend. Majima says that he doesn't really have the kind of connections to make that idea a reality, but soon stumbles, as luck would have it, into a guy who is great at both forgery and at accidentally making it known to random people on the street that he is great at forgery. Majima delivers the good news to the fool in love post-haste, who thereupon quickly darts to the forger's place to have his heart forged for him. Unfortunately, after following the lad there, it becomes clear all too quickly that some manner of chicanery has taken place, seeing as our foolish friend has been forced into partaking in an obviously unwanted game of the old five-finger fillet. As we do with most situations, we solve it with our fists, and soon after this altercation, our good friend the forger comes by to explain why Necklace Man is being mistreated. He forgot. After that is cleared up, the forger goes to work, and Necklace Man happily leaves with necklace in hand. The only thing that could stop us from getting off scot-free now is guilty conscience, which it ends up doing. The guilty conscience of Hardman specifically. We spy on him giving the present to his lady, who is very happy about the gift. But soon Hardman reveals the truth of the jig. His girlfriend quickly goes from joyous to hurt, but Majima makes his entrance to mend the situation, and reveals how much effort and danger Hardman went through just to make her happy. She is still angry, but this time about him putting himself into danger, and Hardman has learned to stop doing dumb shit from here on out. And we have learned that the intent behind the present matters more than the present itself. In the finale of Kiryo's disco quest line, he faces off against one final opponent. That opponent being none other than certified Yakuza Club Shito Ogita from Yakuza 5. He came here from Osaka to dab on all the Tokyo dancers, making a mockery of them, until the dance king of Kamurocho shows up. Of course we must defend our dance turf from this western menace. There can only be one dragon of the dance floor. After wiping the floor with him, we get the chance to just completely mog the poor guy, which goes pretty hard. I gotta say, I think the angle of facing off against a foreign menace to protect the Tokyo dance's integrity is pretty nice, and this is actually a pretty good use of a glove shito as some connective tissue to a future game. Plus I think Kiryo's character development is funny. At first he was disappointed when he realized that the woman that talked to him wasn't flirting with him, and now he's visibly disgusted whenever she does. Alright, this one is the last porn related sub-story in this game I think. In The Girl in the Video, we watch porn co-op with some other guy, because that's a thing that people do I think. This guy is like the Kuma final boss, absolutely obsessed with this one girl from a video that he keeps rewatching and jorking his peanuts to, much to the disdain of the video shop owner for some reason. This poor chap would have long declared bankruptcy if he lived in the world of thirst trap streamers and super chats, brother. Anyway, he wants us to help him find the girl in real life because that's a very normal thing to do. Once he has found a lady who very much seems to be her, the Guna guide is one of the most rizzless things I've ever seen. And then it turns out the girl isn't actually the video girl. And then this uncomfortable situation is luckily saved from going any worse by Horny Man showing up wanting to beat the girl up. Guna Man steps in, and then we step in and we save Goon Man who saves the lady. Now of course I don't want to steal no valor, he did hold his own. He threw some punches, you know, only did like 2 damage, but still. This altercation filled Melancholy Man with the resolve he needed to ask the girl out. Sure, she's not the titular girl in the video, but still he wants to be with her, because he likes her as a person, rather than as some girl he saw in a smut video 1,000 times. He truly learned a lesson today, and he's about to learn another. Kiryu accidentally aura farmed too hard and showed off a bit too much by using using his fully upgraded dragon-style right hook against Horny Man, having the girl fall for him and the guy fall into a dark place, his mind broken. Next up we have the first entry of a 2 Substory series, where we meet an itchy bum named Kasuga, no, he's a reporter actually, who infiltrates a dark, shadowy world of crime to drag it into the light through investigative journalism. We meet him in a bar that he is frequenting to get deeds on a secret illegal arms dealer, who discreetly conducts his business here. In doing so he ends up in quite a pickle, and Kasuga is only saved by claiming that Kiryu is his sworn brother. After beating up the guy he's like, yeah, I guess you're evil enough to buy a gun, and then Kasuga is like, wait, I don't need a gun. And that's about it. This sub-story is fairly unremarkable, but I think it's a nice little sub-story for world building, you know? Not every sub-story should be some goofy-ass extravaganza. Sub-stories are like a box of chocolates, you never know what you're gonna get. After somehow surviving his first foray into the dark world of crime, Kasuga is so motivated that he follows a trail of information about a secret human trafficking ring. Yeah, following that seems like a pretty good idea. And he also refuses our help, which was pretty rich coming from the guy who only survived his last underworld encounter with the help of us. And yeah, of course things go wrong, he almost dies and is only saved by a most mysterious bossman, who we too know as Bossman, the bossman of a certain most favored bar. I guess maybe this human trafficking boss actually isn't such a bad guy. I feel like we're learning a lot about the upsides of human trafficking today. In crossed words, Majima is forced into being a part of some relationship hijinks, caused by this schlub being a wee bit too quirk-chungus to propose like a standard issue normal human being, instead opting for encrypting a message via crossword puzzle for his hopefully fiancé-to-be to solve. This plan isn't quite working out, her seemingly possessing a sub 100 IQ and him being an annoying ass type B chatter over her inability to solve these riddles. Entrance Majima was forced to help the poor lady arrive with a life-changing hidden message over a scrumptious lobster dinner. Now with some of these I really gotta wonder how our most distressed damsel didn't arrive at the correct answers, but Majima manages to finesse his way through the puzzle, and the author's intent is fully revealed. The lady accepts, but also reveals that she knew the truth of the puzzle all along, and just wanted the guy to say it with his own words, rather than hiding his feelings in an obtuse riddle. Why we had to be strung along for the ride, who can say? Alas, the lady accepts, the gentleman learns the most valuable lesson, and Majima discovers his inner comedian. All is well in the end, and I must say I like this one. Just Majima vibing and being pulled into a strange little slice of the life of a young couple of dogs. It's not an all-time classic, but it is a satisfying little story, and I enjoy the little crossword puzzle element. Also high five brain. The substory underneath it all starts out with Kiryu being witness to an apparent lover's quarrel, and one of its participants turning to Kiryu for help with the most delicate matter. This high school kid suspects that his girlfriend is selling her body, thus Kiryu is roped into this thing and has to go find out her secret. He hits up the high school girl, who immediately seems to be confirming the lad's suspicions by asking a simple question: top or bottom? Kiryu of course immediately shouts out the word bottom, but only because he's trying to find out the truth. He isn't really a bottom, guys, no. While suspicions of the seedy nature of the business she's conducting were right on the money, it is not quite exactly the business boyfriend man was thinking of. Rather than selling her body, she is selling her underwear, thus top or bottom. Kiryu then fails a bunch of speech checks, which keeps him from acquiring the wares he sought out. Well, no, I suppose it's not the wares he's after, and he's after her being frank with her boyfriend. And then after being called a pervert, he goes on this tirade about how there's nothing wrong with being a pervert, which goes hard as all fuck to be right honest with ya, but also gives her the ick, so I guess society wasn't quite ready for that one yet. Upon further investigation, after finally passing the charisma check, we find out that this girl was not quite voluntarily selling her used underwear, instead being part of an outfit controlled from the shadows by an underwear mafia girl boss, who we face to make her give up her strange enterprise. God forbid a girl has hobbies. Kiryu once again fails every speech check, and is about ready to leave in defeat, when our savior, iconic character Unhinged Man, comes along and helps us out. Now obviously the schooner truly lives up to his name and is fucking insane, but he helps us by virtue of trying to kill the girl so we can save her by beating the guy up and having her realize the dangers of her trade and that she'd best disband the underwear mafia. The high school girl also drops this line about how you should only show your underwear to someone you truly care about, and gives Kiryu an expectant look, and he just hits her with the greatest response I've ever seen. We then go on taking the high schooler and illegally employing her in our real estate business, and everyone is happy, probably. Destiny Calls is the 8th telephone club related substory that Yakuza 0 has to offer. Now this statement may immediately give you a PTSD attack. That would be a most understandable reaction indeed, but mercifully this one isn't related to with the dogshit system that I explained in detail earlier. Nor do you actually have to play the telephone club minigame at all for this one. It's just a regular old sub-story that happens to be about a telephone club. So, Kiryu is recruited into helping a telephone club barker with a problem customer, mostly just because of his silky smooth voice. He talks to a slightly strange lady who is incredibly fixated on Kiryu's little guy, and talks about how he's going to lose this little guy, and Kiryu successfully manages to get her to meet up with him, but like only because this barker guy needed help, not because Kiryu is interested in stuff being done to his little guy or anything, especially not his little guy getting off for 50 yen. They meet up in the homeless park, truly fitting for a romantic rendezvous. Turns out though that this lady is actually a child kidnapper guy. I always really enjoy it in sub-stories when there's a very obvious misunderstanding going on which both parties are completely oblivious to, with the writers really going all in on creating these ambiguous lines. I don't know man, shit cracks me up. Kiryu is also back to his 10 IQ self we saw in that one Mother Telephone Club sub-story, reasoning that the guy he meets at the park talking to him about his little guy must be a friend of the lady he talked to on the phone, rather than just being the lady. But I think my favorite part of this sub-story is the moral 180 that the kidnapper does in the end. It's a certified sub-story classic for a character to suddenly be like, I'm so sorry that I did all this bad stuff, I'm a good guy now. And also the old, listen to my sad backstory, I never wanted to do all this bad stuff, actually, I'm so sorry. Like that stuff gets memed all the time, and for good reason, but I think rarely is it quite as jarring and extreme as it is here. This man literally kidnapped a child, and after getting his ass kicked he suddenly sounds like he just found the light of Christ in Kiryu's fists. Plus you've got Kiryu giving him the old tried and true speech about how it's never too late. But I think the funniest part of it is how this goon doesn't even get the sad sub-story theme. Instead there's the celebratory sub-story theme playing while Kiryu tells him that after a stint in the joint, they can go to a telephone club together. And the guy's like, hell yeah, sounds great. Anyway, I'm off to atone for my sins. What a guy. In Sugar Daddy we meet a guy who seems to be creeping on a girl. His name is Anguished Man, and rather than trauma dumping at the end of the sub-story to establish why he did the wrong things that he did like the guy from the previous sub-story, he instead opts for the old immediately trauma dump on Kiryu to explain a strange seeming circumstance that Kiryu was in the process of misunderstanding Strat. The gist of his trauma dump is that the girl he was purportedly stalking is actually a girl he believes to be his estranged daughter, and now that he has somewhat recovered from his life falling apart back in the day, which was the reason for his family leaving him, he's thinking about seeking to reconnect. We help him by going undercover and finding out that her storylines up remarkably well with his, her being estranged from her father since early childhood. So Kiryu decides to introduce her to him. Father and daughter are finally reunited, except they are not, for she is a different person entirely. The guy doesn't let that ruin his mood though, and instead decides to take advantage of the situation and visit her club as a customer. And then he's like, you look just like my daughter. And then tells her to call him daddy. So the guy we thought was a creep at first glance in actuality turned out to be a creep, but like in a different way. And that's something. I like the part at the end that shows how Kiryu tries his hardest to turn this shit into some kind of life lesson. He does really try, but if there's a sub-story with no moral to it, then this might be the one. What the hell is up with this old creeper man? Also Kiryu sitting there looking like he's one step away from sitting in the cuck chair. Just as an aside. An iconic part of Yakuza 0 is the Pocket Circuit minigame, which pits Kiryu against other hobbyist racers in slot car competitions. The gameplay itself is fairly simple, you don't really do much except mash a button whenever your car is close to flying off the track, and also press a button to use your boost if you happen to actually want to fly off the track. While the minigame itself is quite simple, there's more to it, as the true game is actually the slot car customization. Before each race you get to pimp your ride and use different parts you can acquire from the local parts shop and from random corners in Kamurocho. These parts will be advantageous or less so depending on the layout of the given course, so you will have to get experimenting. Or you can just look at Cyrix Z's guides. But the crown jewel of Pocket Circuit isn't the racing gameplay, nor is it the car customization. No, it's the accompanying sub-stories where shit gets real. And there's a bunch of them. This is the first in the series of related Pocket Circuit sub-stories. Probably the weakest, as it doesn't really stand out too much. I do like how Kiryu is like, yeah, I really like your gutsy driving style, when in reality I lapped that fucker out of the race in like lap 2, bozo. Also the title card timing is one of the best ones in the game. Following Kiryu's thought process about being called Kazuma-kun, we get the I am Kazuma-kun title drop, which is sorta a bit cinema, I'm afraid. Next on the list actually isn't the next sub-story. Instead we have Pocket Circuit sub-story number 5, which to me is kinda one of the more forgettable ones of these. We fight some girl and then we win. The Doll Girl sub-story. This one I've actually ranked pretty highly for a friendship sub-story. We meet the titular doll girl, who is a girl who likes dolls. Specifically, she likes the dolls that make up the prizes you can win at the UFO catcher, but as she lacks the funds to acquire them, she just admires them from a distance. Majima takes pity on the doll girl who has no dolls, and takes it upon himself to win her the Chestnut the Squirrel doll she's been eyeing, in part so she doesn't keep spending time in the seedy part of Sotenbori at the seedy time of day. It is our task, thus, to put our UFO catching skills to the test. And I would say think the Yakuza 0 version is one of the easier ones. I'm not 100% sure about this really. It does sometimes come down to luck and one's current state of mind anyway, but I've had some horrific crane game sessions in some of the other games, like Kiwami for example. But to my relief, getting the doll girl's dolls posed no great challenge. We acquire the chestnut doll, but that isn't enough to satiate her greed for too long. The next time Majima comes by the arcade, a familiar face pops up, and we repeat the same charade a couple of times.
Another one.
That is until one day, instead of finding the girl here, we find another familiar face, all torn to shreds, that of Bunchan. The doll girl is not far, grieving for the treasured sparrow, and leads us to the masterminds behind this terrible crime. An amusing part of this story is just how fucking evil these guys are. Obviously we get two-dimensional horrific shitstains as antagonists in Substories pretty regularly, but every now and then they go the extra mile of being unapologetically evil and unhinged. Like, damn, chill. I think there's a lot to like about this sub-story, like seeing the signs of Majima being good with kids, when he's not kidnapping them anyway, but I especially like the ending here after disposing of the unwanted hooligans, where Majima compares the beaten up cuddly toy to himself. Should have me saying damn for real. It's just a nice and wholesome little tale, and sometimes that's all a guy like Majima really needs. The Mushroom Merchant is really good for a friendship quest. The concept of some dweeb selling regular mushrooms in the most sus way possible is pretty good. After defending him from goons who obviously misunderstand what this guy is offering, Hideo's great solution is maybe you should just sing a little jingle about mushrooms, then they'll get it. And then some Andre Richardson looking fucker appears and is like, ah yes, I was once an Italian chef, but I was just missing the right mushrooms, so I became a mafia boss instead. And frankly, that's the kind of bullshit I'm looking for in a Yakuza side quest. And then everyone is happy and celebrating except for the mafia goon who's just dead in the background. Man, this one is actually pretty peak. There's even a teeny tiny epilogue in the form of the mafia boss joining our real estate firm, where he talks about how the mushroom man has become such a great and esteemed chef that mafia man had nothing more to do in Italy, and instead decided to head back to Japan to see what's what. And now gravity itself has made him join our company. Yakuza is no stranger to toilet-related side content, whether it's delivering toilet paper to people in need, which happens pretty damn often in this universe, or playing the Yakuza Kiwami 2 pissing minigame. While we don't engage in any deep pissing mechanics in Yakuza 0's Toilet Talk sub-story, a lot of it does take place in a public toilet. Majima finds scribbles of an alleged lady in there, and replies to her in a most suave manner. After a bit of back and forth, they decide to meet up. Yet when arriving at the promised place of meeting, Majima only meets a bunch of goons who have been tricking people by pretending to be women, hoping to find gullible dumbasses to then beat up and steal shit from. Catfishing was damn tricky back in the day, huh? Of course they're not able to best Majima, physically anyway, I suppose it did mentally, but while retreating they drop a most interesting tidbit. They didn't scribble shit in a public toilet, but Majima doesn't care anymore, rage quits the situation and goes home to cry in the shower, and thus he would never know that there was a woman waiting for a sex-crazed pervert to arrive. I suppose Majima doesn't really tend to get happy endings in matters of love. The second Pocket Circuit sub-story starts where the first left off. The friends of the kid we pummeled there are also involved in Pocket Circuit, and there's some drama going on between them. Drama of the romantic kind. Romance and its consequences have been quite disastrous for humankind, some philosophers may argue. Philosophers such as Takuma-kun, who appears to have lost his Pocket Circuit playmate to the whims of romance. Of course Kazuma-kun doesn't care about that shit. He just wants to beat another kid at the slot car racing game by buying all the most expensive parts at the part shop with the money he's raking in with his real estate business. And fortune smiles upon us, as the victim of romance wants to prove his valor in front of the girl he likes by beating us, which goes about as well as can be expected. The third sub-story is interesting cause we have to race against a little girl who promises to become Kazuma-kun's girlfriend if he wins. Now hold your horses. It's not like he's interested in that in any way. The only thing he wants is to be the best Pocket Circuit racer, so he cannot deny anyone a duel. He do be kinda acting sus on main though, brother. I hope they don't find Kazuma-kun in the Dondoko Island flight logs. We also got the Marvel post-credit ass tease. That's how you know the Pocket Circuit story is serious business. Next is the Pocket Circuit sub-story The Professor of Pocket Circuit, which has us fight the so-called Professor of Pocket Circuit. This lady is basically the one competitive triad Pokemon player in his 30s who destroys literal children at his local game store. We show her that data crunching and stats maxing isn't everything, and that instead having the assets of an actual real estate company that will let us buy the rarest of parts for a toy car, and also believing in ourselves, will lead us to victory. The second to last of the Pocket Circuit sub-stories has us fight against this kid. In a way, this is the climactic battle of the overarching Pocket Circuit saga, or at least of the drama that unfolds within it. He's not just the fastest racer around, but also a real piece of work, bullying the other children over the lack of skill on the racetrack. By beating the last of the kids, Kiryu doesn't just prove his worth as a racist, but also teaches the kids a lesson about the value of friendship and all that, and yet the final opponent, the true champion, still lies in wait. Next up we have the sequel to the Substory where Kazuma-kun gets a 9-year-old pocket circuit girlfriend, or whatever the flying fuck happened there. It's called Suspicion of Perversion because this guy susses out that Kazuma-kun is up to no good. He's actually the girl's father and says that Kazuma-kun is a pervert bastard and that he can't be with his daughter who is a literal child, except if he wins at pocket circuit, which is certainly a position to hold. Kazuma-kun once again is bound by the honor system to give his all in a match of pocket circuit. Luckily, after mopping the damn floor with him, we get the chance to explain the situation in detail. I like this substory mostly for its comedic shenanigans, but also this part where Kazuma-kun and the other dude are just in an izakaya talking over beers about pocket circuit racing. Just a nice little vibe. In this finale of the pocket circuit minigame, we face off against the one and only pocket circuit fighter. There isn't a terrible lot more to say about it, just an absolutely satisfying finale to finally be the king of pocket circuit. Good shit. It may seem like we have already covered all pocket circuit substories, but there is one more. The pocket circuit fighter friendship substory. This friendship quest contains pocket circuit fighter's past, his ambitions, and struggles. Featured are a lot of funny moments, but touching moments as well. I'd go as far as to say that many of the most iconic moments from the pocket circuit stories happen in this one. It's a good microcosm of the roller coaster that is pocket circuit racing, and it has a lot to say about following your dreams, even if it may not be the best of life choices. At the same time though, I enjoy that Kazuma-kun actually gives Fighter pretty reasonable advice. He's like, yeah, follow your dreams or whatever, but at the same time there's no shame in living a stable and humble life running your parents' tofu shop. Man, Kazuma-kun is a good friend. Alright then, we are entering A tier now. A tier and above contains all substories that I would classify as straight up great. So, substories that are particularly memorable and make good use of the substory format. Basically all of these are bangers. Coming up is the final substory in the game, according to the substory list at least. Substory number 100. Majima's final substory, Suten Body in Peril, has him face off against Joe Amon, who's a serious mainstay secret boss, who tends to appear once you finish all of a Yakuza game substories. This is his chronologically first appearance, and it's used here as a bit of a gag. Having him talk about how he will return in a suspiciously specific number of years to fight again. I really like the concept of having a secret boss unlocked by finishing all other substories, and using Yakuza 0 as a prequel even to Joe Amon is pretty fun. The fight itself is strange because it's pretty damn tricky, until you realize it has one of the most devious cheeses yet served to man, and his health bar melts down like the damn glaciers. As Majima says, this Joe truly put us through a bizarre adventure. Now we have the Daigo substory. I think this substory is a fair bit more interesting if you have played more of the Yakuza series and are like, oh shit, there's child Daigo. Otherwise, it's kinda just a whole substory of hanging out with an annoying spoiled brat. It's pretty good though, seeing this kid just act like a complete son of a bitch sometimes here. Also, if you are familiar with Daigo from other games, it feels really weird that they just give him the same whiny child voice lines that all the other children have. That's not my goat, man. I think this substory is probably the occasion in this series that shows the most that he truly is his father's son. Just him being an ass to pretty much everyone he encounters, thinking he's better than them. It's a great prequel in the sense that we see Kiryu being there to set him straight, being his moral compass to make him walk a better path. When you first officially meet him in Yakuza 2, it's already established that they have quite a history, so this story makes perfect sense. So I'd say by far the best part of this substory is seeing Kiryu's influence counteracting the piece of shit Dojima genes, and seeing the seeds of Kiryu playing the role of a father figure, while Dojima Soe is out plotting and shit. Let us talk about another substory that introduces us to a character that we have already been introduced to in the future in another game. A shining example shows us the very first meeting between Kiryu and Shinji, who at this point in time is not much more than a common thug, though his goals are interesting indeed. He wants to fucking kill Yakuza. Too bad he chooses the worst possible Yakuza to try and kill. Well, actually it might be the best possible Yakuza to try and kill, cause he's one of the few that wouldn't try and kill him in retaliation. And actually he isn't even Yakuza. Kiryu tells Shinji to never do stupid shit like this again, and Shinji proceeds to do more stupid shit. And not only does he get himself into mortal danger, he's also getting us involved. Kiryu goes to the Yakuza who Shinji has upset to peacefully talk the situation out, and Aura farms so hard that he now has a loyal follower for a lifetime. If we were to take inventory of all substories across the Yakuza series and tally up all types of substories there are, it wouldn't really shock me if the most common kind of substory was the scam variety. Again and again and again, Yakuza protagonists get scammed in all kinds of different ways. Now most of those substories are contained in Yakuza Kiwami, but we do have a good old-fashioned scam here as well, and I do think it's only one substory in Yakuza 0, which is slightly surprising. The substory in question is called The Watery Investment, a story where Kiryu plays a knight in shining armor for a lady who is getting hounded by a group of most dastardly seeming fellas. As a thanks for helping her out of the most dire of straits, she proposes to Kiryu a fantastic business opportunity of buying into this miracle water at the crazily low price of a lot, so he can resell it to others. It's not a pyramid scheme, guys. Refusing to buy this miracle water is one of the most demanding tasks that Kiryu faces in Yakuza 0. Saying no ain't always that easy, especially if a pretty lady asks you oh so very nicely, and especially with the knowledge of its supposed effects on one's vigor and vitality. But he sticks to his guns and is content in his decision, until he has a sip of this stuff and realizes it might be a tad bit more miraculous than he thought. Maybe it is just the fact that this sub-story is contained in a game fairly devoid of scam sub-stories, and maybe this one would be ranked lower if it was in the scam parade of Yakuza Kiwami, but to a guy like me this sub-story felt refreshing like a can of aha water. I do think it's a bit more fleshed out than a lot of other scam sub-stories across the series, and I think the old MLM scheme thing makes for an entertaining little story. It's pretty decent. The Show Must Go On features Kiryu's first canonical foray into showbiz. It certainly won't be his last time, as many future roles as actor, stunt double and so much more await him. But he starts humbly as a producer, as this production's actual producer is nowhere to be seen, and the schedule is a tight one. We work with star director Hideo Kojima and his minions, and we have to help out with a bunch of stuff like procuring an eraser and shotting at food. Alright, so a big problem for me, which is true for some, not all but some, sub-stories with choices involved, and is especially applicable to this one, is that you get a better item reward if you make all the best choices, but the sub-story itself is far more entertaining if you fuck up, especially when going for completion. It's not like the item rewards are all that amazing, but I do think some of them are exclusive rewards, maybe. Possibly. Anyway, I made all the correct choices but then watched the bad ones on YouTube and they were very funny, so you know, still a good sub-story. Then after beating up the original producer who tags us for stealing his strip, we get a nice little conclusion about how hard yet rewarding the world of making art is. And I think the moral here is quite simple. Crunch is pretty sick. Next we have the other final sub-story, number 94, the head of the clan, Kiryu's sub-story finale. He faces off against another Amon, So Amon, the progenitor, and this guy is pretty insane. He gets out his big fuck you cannon and then shoots you again and again until he's bored and pulls out his insta-kill laser instead. Much like with Joe Amon, I thought this fight was just messed up. Until I realize I can just go beast mode and super armor through all he throws at me so I don't trip and get vaporized by his laser. That is until he goes beast mode as well, at which point it's just a battle of who is the biggest beast of them all. This fight is super jank, but I do think it's a very memorable and pretty fun super boss. In Rise of the Dragon we meet a Yakuza icon, Ryuji Goda. That is if we have played more than just Yakuza 0. If we have not, then we meet some bizarre 12-year-old kid the size of a Joestar, who is going around stealing pants off of high schoolers who were bullying his classmates. Majima gets entangled in this situation and damn near gets his own pants stolen, but seeing as he is 12 years of age, Ryuji isn't quite like a dragon yet. I think this one is just a funny sub-story, with a ridiculous premise that gives us a little vignette of the younger days of a classic legacy Yakuza character, which I can always appreciate. I would say, as a minor complaint, having Ryuji look like a 19-year-old when he's in primary school feels a slight bit too goofy to a guy like me. You know, feels like one of those cartoon flashbacks when Squidward has hair, or Danny DeVito as a child, you know, that kind of energy. But at the end of the day it's still a good sub-story. It's also, as far as I know, the only instance of a Yakuza protagonist fighting a 12-year-old, which is kind of fresh. And thanks to this sub-story, the only time Majima and Ryuji canonically fight is when he's 12 and stealing people's pants. Next up we have the final of the 6 hostess sub-stories, which I think is by far the best one. I'm talking about Yuki's sub-story, the number 1 hostess of Club Sunshine and vinegar aficionado. In this sub-story, Majima and Yoda, manager of this joint, tail Yuki while she is out and about with a suspicious fella. Feeling a parental duty towards her, they believe that Yuki can't just get hitched to any old dude, which is why they watch over her like some demented guardian angels to make sure he isn't some creeper. And I think already like the best part about this sub-story is just Majima and Yoda hiding behind shit. I especially like this part with some woman walking by in the restaurant staring at them because they're creepy as fuck. During the course of their investigation, a multitude of suspicious things come up, like him thanking her for sending him money, leaving Majima and Yoda sure that she's being taken advantage of, leading to them confronting the man. Of course it turns out that their imagination ran a tad too wild. This man isn't some scam artist creeper, it's actually her father. The 3 men laugh it up about their misunderstanding, while Yuki suffers. A happy ending for all. A taxing issue is a really good sub-story, and one that really says a lot about society too. The Japanese 80s economic bubble is a topic of great interest to economists worldwide, and an obviously important aspect is why the bubble popped. And one topic often coming up in adjacent breaths is the introduction of the consumption tax. In 1989, a year after the game takes place, the consumption tax of 3% was introduced, to the dismay of many Japanese tax taxpayers. This tax since then has been subsequently increased multiple times. We all hate taxes, don't we folks? We pay them, yes we do, we certainly do, but like them, we do not. And we love Majima, don't we folks? But what if I told you that Majima and taxes go hand in hand like the IRS and punishing tax evaders? On a fateful day in the year of our Lord 1988, Majima happened to stumble upon a strange scene. A bunch of hooligans assaulting an honest, upstanding citizen. A politician, his responsibility an important one, coming up with how to tax the populace. Majima is told just that after stopping the concerned citizenry from democracy being made manifest. Here follows an interesting bit of characterization for Majima, that being Majima damn near flying into a blind rage as soon as taxes are mentioned. After regaining his cool, he realized that even the guy who makes our taxes is a human being, and hears him out, listening to his struggles, even giving advice. Which is good for Taxman, as he needs the perspective of a guy who doesn't work in politics, and Majima delivers in space. Before he knows it, he gives great advice on how to bleed them suckers dry. Too bad that he too is a sucker. I think this substory is pretty fantastic considering how damn unique a concept it is for video game side quests to be about the protagonist accidentally influencing the coming decades of tax policy. Also great use of the historical context of the game's setting. This next quest starts when you overhear rumors of a supposedly 100% accurate fortune teller, who Kiryu soon stumbles upon and saves from a goon whose misfortune she had foretold. As a thanks, she offers to read Kiryu's future, which she does. Now, if you are 20-year-old Kiryu, or someone who is playing Yakuza 0 as the first Yakuza game, you might be thinking, what the hell is this lady yapping about? But if you know her, then, well, you know. She spells out all sorts of ludicrous-sounding things that will, one day, come to pass. She also goes fucking aggro mode if you ever reply in any way that she doesn't like. Jesus lady, chill out, will ya? Fucking weirdo. I think this is a fanservice substory done pretty well, honestly. It's literally all just references to stuff that happens in the series, but I think the fortune-telling substory gimmick is a cool idea for a prequel game. Yakuza 0 was my first Yakuza game as well, by the way, and both on my first playthrough ever and on my subsequent playthroughs after beating every game in the series, I enjoyed this substory. I don't know, I think Yakuza 0 is just really good at doing fanservice substories that also work for people that have no idea what is being referenced, because they kinda managed to stand on their own as well. Like, as mentioned, if you're not in the know, then you're basically in Kiryu's shoes here. So rather than being a substory that references a bunch of stuff, it just feels like a substory about a weird fortune teller spotting a bunch of insane stuff. Then there's also the first meeting of two dragons slipped in there at the end. Miracle Johnson returns. Except I haven't gotten to his first substory yet in the ranking, so he returns without ever even first appearing. That's how goated the Prince of Pop is. There's a bunch of little bits and things I like in this one, like Miracle just renting this entire disco to dance in there alone. This weird David Bowie looking guy greeting us at the entrance like an old friend. Miracle's cronies always doing this goofy ass backup dance, and of course the fact that no matter how good you are, you will always lose in a dance battle against the pop star Prince. Now that's cinema. Of course, no video game is complete without spotting at least two tax-related side quests. In the tax lady, Kiryu faces his most frightening foe yet, the Japanese tax office. I don't remember paying any taxes in the real estate minigame, truth be told, but in actuality, Kiryu is not in the crosshairs of the tax officers, not yet anyway. Rather, he is to help out the tax lady find proof of tax evasion in the offices of his neighbor. Of course, Kiryu is passionately anti-tax evasion, the greatest taxpayer maybe ever, so he's down to help Mrs. Tax, and does so a bit too passionately. But his neighbor too is a man of passion, manners of love and tax evasion alike. He welcomes us into his office and excuses himself for a few minutes, which gives us ample time to strike and search the office for evidence of tax evasion. When our combined towering intellects are just about to crack the case, our good friend the tax evader comes back. From here on out, it is Kiryu's job to distract him with all of his autistic hyperfixations, while the tax lady conducts her investigation in the most unsuspicious manner, which results in her finding a videotape of him evading taxes and talking about how much he loves doing it. He is then executed on the spot. I think the majority of the entertainment value of this quest is in forcing Kiryu to be a bit of a sneak deceiving a guy to help a criminal investigation, because Kiryu is pretty damn shit at it, and obviously also just this singular animation here. There's also some kind of gag, I think, at the end of the substory. My intensive knowledge of Japanese culture fails me here, I must admit. I don't know who this lady is or what this bit is all about. The punchline eludes me. Finally, we are in S tier. These are the kind of substories that, if I met a guy at the bar and we were talking about our favorite Yakuza substories, you know, the kind of stuff we'd be doing out there, if he mentioned any of these substories, it would be completely understandable. Because if he was like, oh yeah, I really liked Yakuza 0 Substory 93, the Mr. Shakedown 2 one, I'd be like, I guess you do you, man, and swiftly leave the function. But if he mentions any of these, well, I just dab the guy up, cause these substories are some real shit, alright? Be My Boyfriend is another classic case of our protagonist getting pulled into the hijinks of a stranger's interpersonal relationship relationships, for some reason making them our problem. A strange lady who stops us in the street talks about a strange situation of having inadvertently told her father about a fabricated boyfriend that she allegedly has, describing him in a way that I'm sure is very common to describe your boyfriend to your dad. Yes, I truly would be glad if my daughter dated a guy who has a dangerous aura like a knife. Anyway, that father now wants to meet the guy, the only problem being that he doesn't exist. But maybe the fates intervened. As the only man possibly in the history of mankind, the spitting image of this fictitious boyfriend is now standing in front of her. Majima is left with not much of a choice but to become the Goro-chan to her Koko-chan and meet with his father, while navigating through a minefield of conversation, which he has to master using the few clues his girlfriend has given him beforehand, presenting himself as a polite movie and omurice-loving dentist. But when the chance presents itself, her father admits that he knew all along that this was a ploy of his daughter's, but lets us know that it's fine, that he will keep up the charade and let the pressure off her daughter. And yet when all seems said and done, he takes Majima aside once more and begs him to become the daughter's boyfriend, but like, for real, for Majima's such a stud. In fact, he goes so far as to beg Majima to just get hitched to him instead. When Majima is around, no arrow shoots quite straight. Password Protected might be a slightly strange S-tier pick, and it's basically hard carried by its ending, but the rest of the sub-story is also pretty amusing. Kiryu overhears shady business dealings in the alley near the empty lot, and immediately becomes interested in what sort of business is conducted there. Sadly, he is not allowed to buy anything, as a password is needed to access his wares. He does get the opportunity to receive this password from this other customer, but only if he helps out carrying out some sort of shady something. Now, is it worth it to help out these apparent criminals with their schemes just to get the password to another criminal-seeming guy's seemingly criminal shop? Well, to Kiryu it is. The best part is the ending. The celebratory sub-story music kicks in, and I don't think I've ever seen Kiryu happier than this outside of Pocket Circuit, damn near hitting the Yakuza 3 pose in celebration. Backstreet shopkeeper is like, you buying anything? And Kiryu is just like, later maybe? Just doesn't give a fuck. Kiryu was helping shady people doing shady deals just because he was curious about some random bullshit. And if that isn't the Yakuza sub-story way, then I don't know. I don't know how popular this next sub-story is with a common Yakuza 0 player. I'm pretty sure most people have positive feelings about it, but I feel like I don't often see it being mentioned with the best sub-stories of the game, though I think it absolutely deserves to shout as one among a few that reside at the peak. I'm talking about Damned Yankee, a sub-story where Kiryu runs into a band of hooligans, getting ready for their performance in Theater Square, with a little problem. The image is that of wicked delinquents, but in reality they are anything but, instead being shy, polite, upstanding citizens who help cats out of trees and the elderly across the street in their free time. And they've been asked to hold a Q&A panel at the end of the performance, set to reveal them to the world as frauds. As luck would have it, Kiryu is here to coach them through it, as versed in the world of hooligans as he is, giving the player the ability to decide what sort of cool-ass lines they are to spew. I talked earlier about how some sub-stories feel a bit more boring if you follow the true, intended path by choosing the correct dialogue options at every point, as is the case for sub-stories like The Show Must Go On. What I really like about Damned Yankee is that it's really funny whether or not you choose the best possible dialogue options, which also in turn makes it more replayable than a lot of other sub-stories, cause it's fun to see how the Yankees bring our suggestions to life, and how the crowd reacts to them. Warning, another classic alert. When Kiryu rocks up to Don Quixote as usual, he notices that a queue has formed outside, and upon further investigation finds out that the newest Dragon Quest has been released. Man, these guys lining up are stupid as fuck. I just swagger in there like, let me get a Dragon Quest 11 please. One of the people lining up is a young boy who has saved up his pocket money to buy the hot new release, and all seems to be going quite alright until we meet him again later and see him crying outside Donkey. Turns out some goon has stolen the game from this literal child. Catching up to the thief, the guy's just like, I'm gonna grind your ass just for the experience. Now, what did he mean by this? But this guy doesn't actually have the game cause the gang Goomba already used his dagger of stealing on him, okay? Nominative determinists be like, oh yeah? Then how do you explain gang Goomba getting his ass stomped by us? Sadly, someone else had stomped Goomba before us, and took away the game that he took from the guy who took it from the kid. The final thief is a low-level Yakuza, who is one of the biggest assholes I've ever seen. He's just gloating about having gotten this stupid-ass game. So once again, we will have to fight a guy for it. What the fuck, man? Why are you pulling out a piece of a goddamn video game? What are you, nuts? But yeah, somehow Kiryu manages to not get shot to death over Dragon Quest 3 and defeats the final boss. What follows is maybe the most ridiculous sub-story switch-up ever. The guy starts going on about how he had to steal the game for his son and all that. Bro, what the fuck, you literally pulled a gun on me like 2 minutes ago. You were going for the headshot, my brother in Christ. And to make matters stranger still, it turns out that the son that this guy stole the game for is the very same boy who had gotten his game stolen by some goon. Now that's a damn quality plot twist. We lied to the child for the sake of this criminal's honor, and the Yakuza man has learned his lesson. You know, that's how a game should be played. Well, this side quest is another great one. Kiryu has some serious aura over here. I mean, he usually does anyway, but he's going boss mode on these guys, it's true folks, just straight up roasting their asses. He's pretty compassionate even towards slightly more questionable figures in many sub-stories, but here he's just going around calling these guys pathetic wastes of life. Still, the story has some heart to it, and the writing in the encounters with these goons is really fun. It is at this point that I want to go on a little bit of a tangent before I continue on with the next entry in the ranking. A tangent about the localization of Yakuza 0. I think it's apt to place this little rant here specifically because it would be fair to claim that the English localization of the game, particularly in regards to the dialogue, changes this sub-story quite a bit. If you look at a lot of sub-story dialogue scenes in the Japanese original and the English translation side by side, you will notice pretty hefty changes, and not too few of them. I am not at all an expert on the localization industry or localization practice, so I'll try not to make any uneducated sweeping guesses at how this came to be. But it does seem like the localizers were left on a pretty loose leash when it comes to creative liberties. There tend to be very vocal subsets of English-speaking fans for many creative works that are not originally English, particularly of Japanese creative works that display a strong disdain for any big creative liberties in translating them. I myself am usually a bit torn about that kind of stuff as well. An obvious more extreme example would be the original Yakuza dub, which changed a lot to appear more cool for the Western market, which I appreciate now mostly for its humoristic value. But I mean, yeah, it's not the greatest localization. The original Yakuza was released in a time that can be regarded as a bit of a wild west of localization, where pretty much anything went and quality differed wildly between localized titles. But even these days, localization is not a straight translation job. Some things cannot be translated directly. A prominent example for Japanese games would be all the different ways of addressing one another, some of which find analogs in English, but might lack subtleties of the relations between characters. And then you have some which are just really difficult to accurately translate. Many games that are extremely steeped in Japanese culture, like Yakuza and Persona, will just opt for taking Japanese honorific suffixes into the English translation wholesale. It is in a way often expected these days that the English-speaking fans will be familiar with them, though there are exceptions as well. For example, the way Kiryu addresses Majima in the series is translated by using a different suffix. As for Yakuza localizations, when looking at the main story, if you have knowledge of both English and Japanese and watch some of these cutscenes sub, it becomes obvious that there are some creative liberties taken here, which I don't mind at times, though sometimes there are moments where these liberties can have effects on some usually minor bits of characterization and obfuscate events a bit, which I am not a great fan of. In regards to sub-stories, things become even more interesting in my mind. While the meaning of some main story dialogue changes a bit in the translation, there's seldom anything too major being changed. But with sub-stories, probably due to a mix of them being much more humorous in nature, not being integral to any greater plot, and not being voiced, creative liberties lead to far bigger changes in the script. This will obviously vary from sub-story to sub-story. The majority of the lines will have altered meaning from the original, usually particularly to serve the humor of the sub-story. The Dragon Quest sub-story serves as a good example because it basically introduces a whole new bit throughout the sub-story that wasn't there in the original, that being the vernacular of the goons you face being heavily inspired by gaming verbiage, particularly by Dragon Quest jargon. There's also some auxiliary bits added, like this goon being called Goomba and talking about stomping and being stomped, which is not present in the original. Even though this quest is the most obvious example, there's a lot of bits and pieces that are changed in translation across sub-stories. I think the character that is most affected by this is Majima. A lot of lines, which I do think have become fairly iconic in the community, originate from the localization. I'm not bringing all of this up as a way to prepare a big dunk on the localization team for daring to change a holy scripture or anything. As mentioned, I'm in two minds about this sort of practice. I personally do like translations to stick pretty closely to the original, but at the same time I think they did a great job with a lot of the changed stuff in sub-stories. I've played a fair few games where translators acted a bit too quirky for my tastes, but I think the big advantage of Yakuza side content is that being a bit quirky works well with the already established tone, and I don't think they overstepped any boundaries within the localization work. There are some hit or miss bits strewn throughout the series localization, but for me personally, the Yakuza 0 one is really good, particularly excelling in the sub-stories. Returning to the ranking, we've got another classic coming up. We're in the back-to-back classic territory now. In this one, Kiryu helps a little kid achieve his dream of buying a magazine from the pawn vending machine. Of course, he is initially apprehensive, but is soon convinced as the little master manipulator makes Kiryu think of the many dreams of little Kazama that were squashed by lying adults back in the day, and decides that buying this child a pawn mag is a matter of keeping to his core values. Actually buying the thing proves more difficult than expected, as a bizarre amount of ladies just hang around this alleyway, ready to decry Kiryu as a pervert for making an innocuous business transaction. Even his assistant is hanging around here, meaning there's real danger of a hit to his reputation if he isn't vigilant. But in the end, he emerges victorious from his quest. The boy's trust in adults lives to see another day, and the innocent lad has become the sophisticated covert lad. In the end, Kiryu's quest didn't end up being as covert as he wanted it to be, but he will never know. Outside of both concept and execution being great here, this is a great example of a sub-story that greatly uses music to enhance its comedic effect. I also think Kiryu is still the protagonist whom stuff like this works best with. Just this stoic-ass guy having to do these stupid-ass things. Obviously Ichiban and Majima are also great characters, but they're a bit more loony to begin with anyway. Passport to Pizza. This sub-story has it all. It has drama, it has action, it has humor, it has this weird animation of Kiryu eating a slice of pizza. I have become a broken record, I'm aware, but this is another damn classic. It starts with Kiryu encountering a distraught young woman who is experiencing crisis because she is lacking a visa and can't work, whatever that means. Kiryu, using 100% of his brain, figures this must mean she needs pizza, because she is hungry and if she ate a pizza she would be able to go to work. I'm not even exaggerating, this is straight up his thought process. So off he goes to find a pizza place. Now he isn't very good at differentiating between different kinds of Western food, so he heads to the next burger place and is like, can I get a Krusty Krab pizza? And the burger lady is like, no, but you can order one like normal people do. And then he's like, can you please order one for me? As often in emergency situations, the pizza delivery man comes to the rescue. Of course we could have just let him deliver the pizza to where it is actually needed, but we didn't. So now we are become pizza delivery man, deliverer of pizza. To deliver the pizza we must run through the streets of Kamurocho, and of course we must make haste. For pizza is best enjoyed while it's hot and fresh. Upon a successful delivery, our pizza-loving acquaintance is not at all as elated as expected. Rather, she is confused why we brought her a pizza, and so the misunderstanding is cleared up. She wanted a visa, not a pizza. Them words are pretty similar, to be fair. From here on, the situation grows stranger still. We learn that all along she just needed a visa, for otherwise she is unable to work. Then her bastard pimp boss comes by and we teach him a lesson for treating her like that. Yet upon defeat, he dribbles out the most peculiar drivel. Apparently he treated her like shit because he loves her? Okay. And then he wants her to marry him, which would also enable her to get a green card and stay in the country legally. She says yes and everyone is happy and eats pizza. I think more happy than anyone is the delivery man who stalked us all the way here and looks like he escaped a bad Little Caesars advert. So, yeah. This sub-story's morals feel a bit all over the place. Like, it's presented as a happy ending that she gets married to a sex trafficker. I don't know, the absurdity of it is funny to be honest, but it feels so bizarre that it drops a little bit in ranking for me, as it doesn't feel quite as complete as the other GOAT sub-stories that follow. It's still baller though, obviously. In the entertainer's throne, we help an entertainer on his quest to the throne. Yes. We meet this freakishly statue-looking guy, who might be one of the greatest to ever do it, and with it, I mean looking like a statue. All seems well for this talented chap, until Majima gets wind of his most dire problem while he's performing. He needs to hit the old cabin. Now it is in Majima's hands to save him from certain doom, as he can't just up and leave as he doesn't want to traumatize the child in the audience, which would apparently happen if a statue-looking guy turned out to be a guy. Majima's job, thus, is to cause a distraction to give Statue Man the opportunity to give the audience the slip. For this he busts out all of his famed techniques. You know, he does the hustle, starts singing, starts screeching, all famed Majima classics. But what really gets the people going is him getting into a fight with a bunch of jackasses who can't appreciate his most beautiful serenades. Somehow all this leads to enough confusion for Statue Man to do the old Irish and get the hell out of there, saving himself from soiled pants and his younger viewer from apparently certain trauma. The best thing about this sub-story is Majima publicly making himself not just a clown but the entire circus, singing and dancing and screeching, the sort of thing a mad dog might do once unleashed. It also truly makes you want to be like Statue Man and rise and grind and perfect some kind of craft. Well, I shall become a baker, I think. Most of the iconic Yakuza 0 sub-stories are so well regarded, particularly for their bizarre and comical nature. The next sub-story isn't really like that, and might be a bit of a sleeper pick, but Man with a Stranger's Face is in my view one of the best sub-stories that Yakuza 0 has to offer, and in general a great example of the more serious and emotional sub-stories which appear every now and then in the Yakuza series. This story has Majima encounter a man with a stranger's face. Of course any stranger would spot a stranger's face as long as they are a stranger, but what makes this stranger's predicament unique is that his face is strange even to the people who know him, or rather once knew him, specifically his own family. He was caught up in some pretty bad Yakuza trouble, and the only way to keep himself and his family out of harm's way was to become the man who erased his face. Now the only solace left to him in his miserable chungus life is to watch his son play in the park, through the eyes of a stranger. Even the now once-in-a-lifetime chance to throw his son's ball back to him is taken by a selfish Yakuza goon. His past eventually catches up to him and puts those closest to him in danger, which is where Majima comes in for the support. John Stranger has the chance to tell the truth to his family, and here's where the story diverges from the more typical average happy end Yakuza sub-story. John Stranger, still knowing the danger his continued existence would pose to his family, withdraws coolly, without telling the truth. And so the story goes. Having experienced the ending of Yakuza 0 and maybe even the stories of all Yakuza games makes this substory even stronger in my view, as Akatani's decision to not reveal to his loved ones that he's still alive strongly mirrors decisions made by Majima and Kiryu to sacrifice their happiness to protect others. This one really hits. Great substory. I think if there's one substory that has become the face of Yakuza substories, it might be this one, the Miracle Johnson substory. I feel like damn near everyone who's heard of Yakuza 0 knows that there's a side quest in it where you meet legally distinct Michael Jackson. I've already touched on Miracle Johnson before, just like Miracle allegedly touched the hearts of millions around the world. But this one is his definitive substory, the main event, and his glorious introduction all in one. The substory follows up on the one where Kiryu becomes a producer, as our director friend, who we have helped before, needs us to assist him and his friend Steven Spining, who's still suffering from the effects of having been present on the set of Raiders of the Lost Ark when they opened the Ark of the Covenant. What is it with Yakuza and white people, man? These ghouls give me nightmares. Specifically, the director of Indian Jeans and his gang need help in the filming of a music video for Miracle Johnson's next hit single, but Miracle is a method actor with the highest of standards, and he's refusing to continue the shoot unless the extras playing the zombies in the video attack him for real, to make the finished video seem as true to life as possible. Kiryu's job will be to protect Miracle from the attacking extras, which is an interesting plan in many regards. For one, I feel like it might prove pretty tricky, particularly with 1980s tech, to cut this Japanese brute running around like a madman around Miracle out of the video. I would also wager a guess that this whole thing is a workers' rights violation of the highest degree, but I guess that is a necessary evil in the pursuit of artistic expression. Fighting off zombies who are trying to attack a moonwalking Michael Jackson is one of those classic Yakuza moments that will have you just wondering what the hell you are playing. And this substory has iconic characters, funny dialogue, and pretty fun gameplay in protecting Miracle while he's moonwalking through the street. I think it's pretty justifiably hailed as one of the best. There are some sub-stories in the Yakuza games where from the first 5 seconds you can tell that this is gonna be an instant classic. How to Train Your Dominatrix is one of those, starting with some masochist trying to get his freak on out in the open on the street. Except his dom sucks so much ass that he insults her skills to her face. Kiryu of course can't help but console her, which ends up leading to another public S&M session between Kiryu and iconic duo chauvinistic swine and misogynist hound. Impressed by Kiryu's dirty talk, Are You the Dominatrix asks him to teach her the ways of doming, which he reluctantly agrees to, teaching her S&M lessons in the local children's park. Out of all the strange, insane situations Yakuza 0's main characters have had to go through during the course of this ranking, truly one of the most bizarre ones has to be Kiryu becoming a dominatrix coach, throwing out his advice as though he has any experience at all. I suppose they do say the greatest coaches don't play. In pursuit of teaching his pupil, he gets publicly humiliated in front of a flock of younglings, and is soon forced by circumstance to become witness to the fruits of his guidance. And pondering about it now, maybe this scene on the playground does actually get out-weirded by this other scene taking place in the dominatrix club. Kiryu giving his play-by-play about the dominatrix performance, until he suddenly unwillingly becomes part of the whole affair. Having lived through the small tale, it's all but certain that Kiryu will never be quite the same. This substory's greatest asset is the character work it does in regards to our protagonists. This is truly how it feels to be Kiryu. No other scene in a substory quite so effectively illustrates what it must feel like to go on these weird-ass detour adventures as Kiryu's attempt at teaching the ways of the dominatrix to a woman at the playground while children are watching. Thus, of course it makes sense that this one of all side quests is the one having him question his life choices. It's peak, I'm afraid. At last, we have arrived at the final, the very best substory of Yakuza 0. Honestly, if you ask me what Yakuza 0's best substory is, it will probably depend on what day you're asking me, as there's so many good ones and my answer will change all the time depending on my current mood. The dominatrix one, Miracle Jackson, the Yankees, Pizza, the Man with the Strangest Face, Statue Man, and so many more are all great contenders. But after intensively thinking about it, I do think my number one pick stands above them all. And if you have watched the entirety of this ranking, you may well have already guessed which substory is my number one, Disciple of the New Order. This substory is just a wild ride, a whole damn adventure packaged in this 20-minute vignette. It starts out with Majima overhearing a desperately pleading lady, who's obviously caught up in a bad situation, the nature of which Majima inquires about. The lady's daughter has apparently been indoctrinated by a cult, consisting of a bunch of pyjama-clad weirdos sporting a bunch of oddities. Majima is soon tasked with the infiltration of this cult to make the daughter come back to reality, but to do so he himself must pretend to be most interested in joining this cult, religious order. and he does so in most convincing a manner. He gets the grand tour of the place and learns all the very normal customs of the order, like how to hit him with the old Munancho, and how to properly Shura PP to gain Kalipas, you know, all that good stuff. Majima of course immediately blends in perfectly. As he says, he's pretty much the Shura PP king. While observing the Shura PP ceremony, he finds Iori. He immediately causes a scene by making her ever so slightly question her faith, and inadvertently puts her in the spotlight, as she is reprimanded and shamed for not contributing enough rinchos to the order. This can only be rectified by having her take part in special Shura PP with the great leader of the order, Munan Suzuki. But just before they engage in the ritual, Majima also appears at the office to receive the Munan's blessing and to officially join the order. Disappointed with the half-assed treatment he gets, Majima causes another scene, as the perfect opportunity has arisen to get Iori out of the cult. Okay, so at this point you get to choose one of 3 options, and when I saw this one I thought he'd say it to the cult leader and decided to pick it immediately, but instead he said it to Iori, and that shit just made me look like a damn gooner. Anyway, we mentioned Iori's mother and she wakes up like a sleeper agent from the slumber of indoctrination, and from here on out our mission has become a lot simpler. We just gotta beat the shit out of Munancho Man, who's having an Ace Attorney ass breakdown and then hits his goofy ass pose. His bones broken and his guts rearranged, Munan Suzuki is down for the count. But as fortune would have it, his followers soon come to heal him with the most splendid Shura PP. The karmic justice that the Munan faces makes for one of the most satisfying substory endings in the game. Plus then you get a little epilogue for the emotional core of the story, which are the mother and daughter that Majima helped out. This to me is a perfect substory. It's very funny. It's basically a perfect little adventure for Majima, the weirdo with the heart of gold, to go through as well. Additionally, it's an extremely creative way of representing a real-life problem that, to this day, exists in Japanese society. That being religious cults that prey on people experiencing hardships in life. And I think the substory treats that problem in a pretty mature way. It absolutely makes fun of the absurdity of these cults and the contents of their belief systems, as well as of the people in charge of them, while also showing an upstanding person might be suckered into one if they're at the wrong place at the wrong time. It has some of my favorite comical situations of the entire game in it as well. I frankly don't know if Majima hitting the hustle while saying Munancho will ever be topped. And all that being packaged in one 20-minute long substory. Now that's truly an achievement, and shows just how damn good side quests can be when the developers, quest designers and writers care. Well, there you have it then. All 100 Yakuza 0 substories ranked. This right here being my final ordered tier list. As I said, if you ask me on a different day this might look a bit different, but I think the broad strokes of this make sense. I would be interested to hear what people think about this ranking though. Which takes make sense, which rankings are unhinged, all that stuff. And of course, most important of all, what do you think is the best Yakuza 0 substory? I should truly like to know. I do also have a vague desire to go through more of the Yakuza games and rank the substories. I think it'd be kinda neat to compare them to each other and see which ones have the highest amount of good substories and which ones have the highest average substory quality, you know, that kind of stuff. But will I actually do it? That is a story for time to tell.